Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast. We're back to another show in the Joe Biden presidency era, and I think we're still getting our sea legs, what the dynamics of that are. I mean, it's pretty clear it's better than what is it? What I need to find out. I have been seeing everybody. This has clearly become like a catchphrase, almost like a meme with the former guy, and I still haven't found out where that comes from. That's the way people are. Someone clearly said that about President Trump. But lot to talk about. We have kind of fast and out of nowhere, the governor of New York, who has been a insanely dominant force in New York politics for a decade, and was kind of like a national media star this spring because of COVID. And even, I mean, that was like the tempting fate thing, the writing a book, kind of a quickie book, like The Wisdom of COVID from Andrew Cuomo, out now from HarperCollins. And just very rapid. There have, I believe, been three accusers who've stepped forward. Two are workplace accusations of harassment, inappropriate comments, et cetera. Another, I believe, at a wedding, so not a workplace situation, but a common set of behaviors kind of fitting a pattern. And suddenly, if you would have told me as recently as, God, I don't know, 10 days ago, that Andrew Cuomo might not complete his term of office, that would have been like a joke. I mean, just absurd. And it's a funny thing because Andrew Cuomo, who's been in our politics for, in some ways for like 40 years, but as a kind of a well-known in front of the camera person for good, for almost 30 years, back to the Clinton administration, has had this very paradoxical hold over New York politics, in the sense that, he is in his third term as governor, outdid his dad as, a gubernatorial success. He has been totally dominant. I mean, the Republicans who are put up against him are sort of these like sacrificial idiots. I mean, the Republicans have barely even challenged him, and there have been attempts to primary him from the left, but they've totally failed in electoral terms. And yet, at least in the political and journalistic class, everybody hates Andrew Cuomo. I mean, no one likes the guy. Everybody despises him, and that is certainly not the most important part of this current scandal, but it is definitely a part. This isn't a case where a lot of people are kind of, conflicted and brokenhearted and kind of, he's got to go, but I hate to see this happen. He's done so much. Everybody hates this guy. And now, important to say, in the way that matters most, you can't say that for the voters of the state. He's won handily again and again. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about yet another hearing that's going on into the January 6th insurrection, and still trying to get to the bottom of that. And I guess we're going to talk about miscellaneous stuff about just bullshit about Ted Cruz and just all sorts of other stuff going on. And one thing I will say, in the non Ted Cruz bullshit category, we seem to be getting good news on the vaccine front. We've known for a few months now that we have vaccines that really work, which is fantastic. It has been a lot less clear. I mean, and even this isn't defending the government, but it is worth stepping back and thinking about how quickly can you get two shots into the arms of 330 million people. I mean, we've talked a lot about governmental incompetence and stuff, and there's been so much of it this year. It is infuriating and heartbreaking, but I mean, that is a hell of a challenge, even if you don't have a completely fragmented, healthcare system. And the bigger challenge is, and this is something that I think we're going to be talking about more and more. There are all sorts of obvious good and not good reasons why obviously the American government is going to prioritize American citizens and American residents. But one of the things we have seen in the last 2 or 3 months is the fact that if COVID keeps, even if everybody is, and a lot of people are vaccinated here, if it keeps circulating around the globe, it will keep evolving, and eventually it'll outwit the vaccines. So we really do have to get everybody on the globe vaccinated. And that is what, like 8 billion people, 7 billion people? I lose track. It was, kind of lower when I was a kid. But I mean, it's a ton of people. And a lot of people live in very poor countries where the infrastructure isn't there. Anyway, all this kind of stuff we're talking about. Before we get to that, let me quickly remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. It's made from a special blend of 100% Arabica beans, French chicory, and signature spices, and brewed overnight to give you a velvety smooth cup. You can drink iced, hot, or spiked in a cocktail, any way you want. We briefly ran out of Grady's in my house yesterday, and I had to like do the Nespresso thing. It was like traumatic, and I wasn't even sure quite how to deal with it because Grady's is so good. In any case, treat yourself to a gourmet cup of coffee without stepping foot outside, all for less than $1 a cup. Are you ready to give it a swirl? Get 25% off your first order at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. So, David and Kate, what is up, and who is our extra special guest on this episode?
Yes. Hey, Josh. Well, I'm very excited to have Alex Pareene join us today. Alex is a staff writer at the New Republic. He's the host of the New Republic's podcast, The Politics of Everything. I'm not just saying this. I've listened to it before we even knew you were coming on the show. I think I especially was kind of tuning into some of the earlier ones on climate change. That was kind of an early focus for you guys on the podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, we did. That was one of our very first episodes. We've only been doing it about a year, so there's not a lot of backlog to catch up on.
Right.
Yeah, one of our first ones was on climate change. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Alex. Appreciate it.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
So we were talking just before we kind of pressed record that you had published a story that's made the rounds quite a bit in the last week or so, just under the wire of a separate Andrew Cuomo scandal. And the story you were focusing on, or the story that you wrote, focused on kind of the two sides of Andrew Cuomo. One is the TV character that Josh mentioned, who won an Emmy, I guess, maybe back in the fall.
Oh, really? I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, they gave him a special Emmy for his COVID broadcast.
Just for being awesome in general, kind of?
Yeah.
I didn't realize. I didn't
exactly,
remember that.
Yeah. We all know the TV character, the one who was the adult in the room during the worst days of COVID and, providing a counter to President Trump. But you also dug into Andrew Cuomo, the newspaper character, the Albany, is it the Albany Times? That's the paper up there?
The Times Union, yeah.
Times Union, yes.
Yeah.
Just kind of what a professional jerk he is, basically. And like Josh says, basically everyone in the press hates him, yet obviously he does remain a popular force in New York politics. That piece was kind of coming on the heels of a scandal over the undercounting of nursing home deaths from the coronavirus. Like Cuomo just kind of being a general asshole too, yelling at New York lawmakers that he'll destroy them, ruin their lives, all that kind of stuff. So tell us a little bit more about kind of what you've been thinking about Cuomo and how your thinking has changed now that we have a brand new kind of potentially much more threatening scandal to his political future.
Yeah. Josh was absolutely right to note how quickly this has happened, because I think, like him, 10 days ago, you asked me the political future of Andrew Cuomo, I say, whatever my feelings about the guy, a fourth term is more likely than not. And when before the accusations of sexual harassment, the first sort of crack in the facade was the nursing home thing, and that was the context in which I wrote my piece. It was not not just that an investigation had uncovered a scandal involving his administration. That has happened a few times over the last 10 years. It has usually not amounted to very much,
and it doesn't matter, right?
And like, but to correct one little thing Josh said, like, everyone in the media hates this guy. I mean, I think Chris Cuomo might quibble with that, right? That's actually one, and that's kind of like one part of his armor was that reporters at the Albany Times-Union knew exactly what kind of politician he was. But that story was less interesting to people who put together cable news and that sort of thing. That, or at least that story was less fit for the cable news style than the authoritative executive who's taking charge, coming in, being the adult in the room.
Alex, wouldn't you say that among reporters, though, I mean, obviously, like the New York Post is going to have its own complicated relationship with someone like Cuomo, but wouldn't you say that like the reporters at the Times, like the New York Times, not the Times-Union, were like at the Daily News, the Post, I feel like I was here. Okay, so here's the thing. I only over time got acclimated, even though I'd been living in New York for a long time, got acclimated to the state and the city's politics.
Mm-hmm.
And for me at that point, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, something like that, Andrew Cuomo was, Mario's son, who's, hey, he's governor now. That's great, because I like Mario Cuomo, and I remember he worked for Clinton. That's awesome. And whenever he would come up into like reporter colleagues who just in living in New York City, like, oh, that fucker, he sucks. That dude sucks. What a bully. He sucks. And I'm like, whoa, like, well, okay. Isn't it? But so it's not just the Times-Union, is it?
Oh, no, you were absolutely right. Yeah. And I think it's, in particular, it's people who worked on the state politics desk or the local politics desk in particular would have that feeling about him. And then that would, especially papers like the Times, people move around, so they could be on the national desk in a month or two and still feel that way about Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
But right, I think that's definitely the case where there was a sort of general, and in a way, it was this sort of knowledge of how he operates that these people, these insiders in the media had, that I think they tried their best to get into the New York Times. Like the New York Times has a history of very good reporting about the Cuomo administration, but it was sort of hard to tell a story in a way that could compete with what I thought of as the television narrative. It was especially because, as you say, he kept cruising to re-election. And the other thing that he was aided by, not just his sort of TV savvy, was the fact that you could never paint the Democratic Party as standing up to him because they were scared to or unwilling to, just because of how much power he wielded. And you sort of need, and when you're doing political journalism, you need, for like sort of the sake of making it newsworthy, you need to say like people in his own party are now standing up against him. And until DeBlasio kind of did that and then kind of backtracked. You could always just say like, well, the Republican's the worst, but even Republican complaints about him had much less bearing on reality than sort of liberal and Democratic complaints about him.
Can I ask you one question about this? And this is something that I've been kind of confused about. The new sexual harassment scandal allegations are in a total, set those aside. Those speak for themselves. With the nursing homes thing, there's two separate things. And one part of it I have never really understood. And that is, so there's this issue with the reporting.
Right.
And I guess the most generous version is there was an initial unintentional misreporting, but then when they found out it was wrong, they didn't fess up to it.
Mm.
And that, I guess at least they say, hey, Trump is going to beat us over the head, so we just decided not to say so. But the original thing is this issue of a state order that basically nursing homes had to take back patients with COVID if they could do so safely.
Right.
And I've never been quite clear why that is a scandal, because this is in a period when the hospitals were overloaded. And if someone no longer needs hospital care, they sort of have to go somewhere. I'm not saying it was a right decision, but it's never been clear to me why this was a scandal. The other stuff's obviously scandals, but am I missing? Is there a part of that I'm missing, or what's the story there?
I think I might be wrong on this, but I think the order came in advance of the hospitals being overwhelmed. And the justification, in fact, was we need to stop the hospitals from being overwhelmed.
Right.
And I think that the political angle of it was that it was seen as being done on behalf of the hospitals, and he's sort of considered to be in the pocket of the hospitals, or at least like their political benefactor.
Got it.
And you could see that later on with the there were complaints about, and vaccine distribution is going reasonably well in New York, but there were complaints at the beginning that he took it out of the hands of the public, or of the county health departments of health. So the county departments of health had a vaccine distribution plan. At the last minute, Cuomo steps in and says, "No, we're going to hand it to the hospitals." So I think it was seen as part of this sort of political pattern of like working for the hospitals.
Understood.
Right. Well, Kate, I wanted to. Sorry. Go ahead.
Another dynamic kind of in this scandal that you mentioned in your recent piece, Alex, that I'm interested in, which is, since the second scandal, the sexual misconduct or assault allegations have kind of unraveled, Cuomo has seemed to kind of tack to the, there should be supporting an investigation, I guess. Yeah. And then you have kind of the interesting dynamic of Letitia James being the one who would head up that investigation, who, as you mentioned in your piece, was kind of like, the Cuomo endorsed establishment candidate when she ran for that position. So could you speak to that dynamic a little bit, and maybe, like you mentioned, maybe he expected more loyalty out of her than he's ultimately gotten. She was the one with the big report that kind of sparked anew the nursing home crisis as well.
Yeah, and to if you don't follow New York politics, Letitia James is the attorney general. She was initially a member of the city council, elected not as a Democrat, but as a member of the Working Families Party. And she was the first, and I think maybe so far only, Working Families Party only elected official in the city council. So she came from this sort of arm of the left that is not, that, it was critical of the Democratic machine. That was her political background. She was a very popular politician in New York City, something of a rising star. When Cuomo basically decided that when Eric Schneiderman, who had to resign over sexual misconduct, there was going to be a special election to replace him, the attorney general. There was, again, a sort of left reformer candidate, Zephyr Teachout, who had previously run against Cuomo, who a lot of these sort of left-wing groups were getting behind. And then Letitia James wanted the job too. And I think a lot of those same sort of left-leaning anti-machine types would have been perfectly happy with her candidacy, except that she took, not only did she sort of take the Cuomo endorsement, and she took his much-needed donors, he did so with the requirement that she denounce the Working Family Party endorsement, that she not seek it, and that she'd like say, basically like, it was like, you are aligned with me, like your star will rise with mine. And so she bristled a lot when people said during the election then, and when people said, well, what happened to your independence? She got mad. She was like, I'm not going to belong to Cuomo. She made this deal. And I think the idea was, well, if she makes this deal, like, she's going to be like all these other sort of politicians who know that Cuomo's, off limits in Albany. So this was, it was surprising that this came from her office. When it was this report on the undercounting of deaths came from the Attorney General's office. That's what made it sort of immediately a different kind of news scandal than the kind that Cuomo has been able to sort of wiggle his way out of in the past. It was a popular, statewide elected Democrat who had been aligned with him, saying like his administration did something wrong. And when it comes to the sexual harassment investigation, this is like the big sign that things have changed. We're in totally new territory. Cuomo's first thing that his office said he was willing to do was that he said, we'll have a completely independent commission that James will be in charge of, along with this state judge who is widely seen as a Cuomo ally because she was appointed by him and has a history with him. And this is a sort of another classic move by him to say it's going to be completely independent, but one of my political allies has veto power over the end result. It's basically, he was like, we will do the Moreland Commission, which was an ethics commission that he started and then disbanded in his first term. And James refused that offer. James did not roll over. She was like, no, you're going to refer it to my office and we're going to investigate it on our own. That's how we've done it in the past, and that's how we're going to do it. So I think that's what led in part all these other Democrats to say, oh, this is a new environment. We're allowed to do that now. And it was just a tsunami of Democrats who were waiting for someone to give the signal that it was okay to break from him, who are now thrilled to do so.
Wasn't there, and again, this is my half knowledge of New York politics, the wing of New York State politics that is, kind of broadly associated with Zephyr. Then you have kind of AOC and that kind of new group of new members of the House of Representatives. That whole kind of, left progressive flank of the Democratic Party. Were those people really holding back? I mean, those people have never held back with them. But I guess the point is that they kind of didn't matter in as much as they've always been against him on every front, and it never mattered. So kind of their being against him now didn't seem any different, kind of.
I think, it's actually, I think you can trace this back to, because I think like Cuomo and his people would have sort of laughed at the idea that what they thought matters. And electorally, that sort of wing of the Democratic Party really struggled to win any power in New York politics for a long time, for a lot of reasons. What you can almost, like, in a way, what planted the seeds of this was the defeat of the IDC, which was this group of Democrats in the state Senate who caucused with Republicans. That's what, that was sort of also what led Cuomo to do things like, I'm going to pick this progressive champion, Tish James, to be my AG, things like that. That's sort of what, and Cuomo would like frequently like make the case, I'm the best the left can do, and then like here are the left-wing priorities I'm going to do this year. Like, here's what you get from me this year. That's kind of how he would win his especially once that Republican majority went away. But when I say like the people were holding back, it's definitely like, it's not those sorts of politicians. It was definitely like rank and file assembly members and mainly people in people in the state legislature who, he controls the agenda up there. There's a real reason that they didn't want to become his critics for so long.
Right. Well, it is fascinating just how fast. I mean, like I would say within a week, his not finishing his term and his term went from just preposterous
unless
to
he
like
in the Biden administration or something.
Yeah, exactly. To unimaginable to like better than 50-50. I mean, I don't know where it is exactly now, but it's stunning, and I'm sure he is stunned.
Yes, yeah. He's been holed up. I think he's never had to deal with something like this, and I can't imagine what he's got to be shocked.
I just saw as we were talking, someone tweeted a kind of a press release that he's doing one of his COVID briefings today.
Oh, wow, he is.
And it was notable. I looked closely. He's talking about COVID. I mean, so it's not, I mean, at first I was thinking, fuck, maybe he's going to like resign, but no, I mean,
is he taking questions? Does it say?
I have no idea, but I mean, again, it just on its face, the text was just going to update the state on COVID.
Yeah.
I feel like he hasn't done that in maybe like 8 or 9 days, right?
Something like that. Yeah.
Pretty long stretch for him. Because
and if you follow local politics, the part of this that actually you have to find funny is that Mayor DeBlasio has been doing his briefings now, and a local reporter made this note this morning that I found very funny, which is that DeBlasio basically for the first time in his entire time in office as mayor has been showing up on time to his own press briefings.
Saw that too. Yeah, he's enjoying himself this week.
he really is enjoying himself this week.
Yeah. Well, Kate, maybe we can shift gears a little bit, talk about the kind of aftermath of the January 6th insurrection and some of the hearings that we've been covering, including today. You and I have stepped away a little bit from the coverage to record the pod. Today we have Pentagon officials, FBI officials, kind of intelligence, kind of national security type officials, giving senators a kind of a briefing on, or a hearing on, the security lapses and failures and things like that. Tell us so far kind of what we've learned, if there's anything you feel like listeners should get caught up on, and I don't know, just generally how the kind of post-insurrection accountability effort seems to be going.
Yeah, I mean, I have so far, with the caveat that, we did leave to record this while it's still ongoing, but I found the hearing today to be kind of the least helpful so far of these post January 6th hearings. Part of that is because I just think a lot of the people who are there are kind of in the sweet spot of being not high enough to have the answer to questions, or at least not high enough that they're able to kind of pass the buck to the people who are above them, but also not, on the ground of the day. With the exception of the commander of the DC National Guard is there. And obviously questions about kind of the delayed activation, deployment of the Guard are still, 3 hearings in. We've gotten very little clarity about it. And if in the hearings we have had so far, it's been mostly, we've gotten contradictory reports of who called, who, when. And so far, very little of it is kind of touched on the top of the chain of command, which is where a lot of the problems or a lot of the delay seems to lay there. And so having the commander today, we're starting to kind of, it's like every hearing we've been getting links in the chain of the DC National Guard authorization, and he's the highest link we've had so far. So that's kind of pushing most of the problems above him. And there's, only about 3 guys ahead of him in the chain of command leading up to the president. So,
right.
So we're inching closer. But the problem with that chain of command, there's a lot of problems, and people have used it as like an argument for DC statehood and everything. But a part of the problem is every time you have these kind of isolated links in the chain, it's really easy for them to shift the burden of responsibility to other links in the chain who aren't there. So that's kind of a way that these hearings have been ineffective, and that it's just really hard to kind of pin down what the truth is. Instead, we have like 3 contradictory accounts of what happened. But yeah, this one has been like not had a lot of, I don't know that the others had bombshell moments per se, but it's just been kind of a lot of trying to pin down the timeline. And we haven't really heard anything that would be most interesting about, where Trump was during this or what his role was in the slow deployment. So we're still kind of trucking along, getting one little nugget of new information at a time.
Yeah, I'm curious, this is kind of a question for anyone. If, we're still waiting on the January 6th commission to come together. We haven't had a lot of movement on that since, I guess, we last spoke, Kate. But is that kind of the best case scenario for actually getting to the bottom of what happened and, trying to learn lessons from it? Or, are these hearings effective at all? I'm just curious, anyone's thoughts on that?
I mean, I've been doing some reporting on the commission, and a big theme that's kind of emerged is that if Republicans want to sink it, they can, basically. Even with the drafted kind of proposal, the split of the commission, which would give Democrats 7 commissioners to appoint, including the chair, and then Republicans 4 commissioners to appoint, there's really nothing to stop the Republicans from picking, like the firebrand, very pro-Trumpy kind of people. And if they were to do that, it would be, kind of dead on arrival in the way that everybody holds up the 9/11 Commission as like the gold standard of this, because it was bipartisan and you had people who were, on the whole pretty invested in the fact-finding mission. And you always had a Democratic and a Republican commissioner appear in media together as a pair. And so, it seems to me that if they end up going with all firebrands, it would be harder to achieve any kind of across the spectrum credibility like that.
Isn't the point of a commission to figure out what happened? I mean, it seems to, I've been a little, look, ideally, the sort of the point of doing these commissions is you kind of, all the national stakeholders, let's get together, let's agree so it has a lot of buy-in and all that kind of stuff. That really is the ideal. But again, the Republicans were behind what you're investigating. So there's a kind of a basic structural problem right there. I mean, Bin Laden didn't appoint anybody to the 9/11 Commission. That would have been awkward. So I guess I'm confused by and resist the idea that it's dead on arrival, because it's a given to me that the Republicans will try to sabotage it. I mean, how could they not? Their leader did it. So, and so the key to me, I mean, yes, you're going to have whoever the Republican co-chair or whatever, whatever that person, the lead Republican, is going to be going on Hannity every night and whining about it. But it seems to me the point is figure out what happened and then get that out and whatever. So why isn't that more the focus?
Well, dead on arrival from the vantage point of the 9/11 Commission, and that the commission will produce a report that is widely accepted by everyone, that not undermined by some of the members of the commission, that kind of way. I mean, You're right. Even if McConnell and McCarthy end up, putting Hannity on the commission, the Democratic members of the commission will still, do a fact-finding mission and release a report and everything. But, then it's just a different dynamic. Then you're going to have a report that will only be accepted by half the aisle. That is, undermined with a minority report from the other people. And, and maybe that's just the best you can do.
I was just looking this up to make sure I had this correct. There's precedent for this, basically, with the Commission on the Financial Crisis. The Financial Crisis Inquiry was a bipartisan commission where the report came with a dissenting report from every Republican member. But the actual report the Democrats produced, as far as I know, was received fairly well by people who read it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that might be the case that we're looking at. I just think, there've been kind of a lot of pieces from the people who led the commission before, being like, it must be bipartisan and it must be good faith by all. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the difference between having a big dispute on kind of the accountability section of the commission's work and then having a dispute over everything.
My feeling is that it really shouldn't be hard. And if Democrats wanted to be super aggressive about it, and because what they wanted to be bipartisan just sort of for the sake of saying for the sake of getting everyone to accept the end result. But we know that's impossible in this political landscape.
Yep.
It'd be easiest thing in the world to make a bipartisan commission where Pelosi appoints all the Republicans, Democrats don't actually have trouble finding, H.W. Bush era Republicans that they can find to agree with them on things.
Well, I'm curious. Is it being treated as a given that the members will need to be all serving members of Congress, or is that not?
I think it's obviously a given that they won't be.
Will not, that none will. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I almost guarantee you that even if you Liz Cheney's not going to go on the commission. Right. She's too smart for that. And it's almost, so anybody, it would have to be, if you did choose them, it would have to be people with no ambitions for any Republicans who are already cashed out, basically, if not have become Democrats, because you're dead to anybody if you don't go on there. But again, that's why I've been sort of I get what they're trying to do sort of and go through the motions, but I've been a little bewildered and disappointed that we're even entertaining McConnell says no way. Who gives a fuck what he says? You're the majority, so you make the commission. You don't need any buy-in. You just do it, and that's the end of the story. And the whole thing is sort of it's just a replay with slightly different subject matter and players to the COVID relief bill, with McConnell saying, "Oh, this isn't bipartisan." Okay, no kidding. You're going to say whatever. So I don't know. It just I wish they weren't even entertaining this at some level. Just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a good segue to one of our favorite topics of late, talking about the filibuster, because just before we came on today, there's reporting that Biden has agreed to kind of lower the threshold for cutoff of relief checks. This is something, I think Manchin was pushing for, other moderate Democrats, to secure the votes to, I guess, basically get the relief bill through the Senate. If I'm not mistaken, I think the cutoff will be 80,000 maybe for individuals, 160 or something for households. Alex, you've been writing about this a little bit lately. Kind of what's your prediction for the future of the filibuster, the Sinema Manchin dynamic duo that I guess is kind of standing in the way so far?
It's hard to predict. It's because the thing about Sinema and Manchin, Sinema in particular, that they tell you we will never, ever change our minds on the filibuster, ever. But you can't get a sense of them from okay, what do you want to actually do in Congress? You ask them, what do you want to actually do? What do you want to get passed this year? And what you hear is I want to restore bipartisanship. Manchin will sometimes say rural broadband. All right, sure. Maybe you can get 10 Republican votes for rural broadband. But like Sinema doesn't even seem to have an agenda. So when it comes to like, if you could make the case to these moderates that, well, look, these are your political priorities. Only way they're getting through is if we change the filibuster. Then I would say they're going to change the filibuster. But what it comes down to is like, do those two want to actually accomplish something or not? I don't think. And Josh and I were just talking before we were recording a little bit about this, but you know, I think there is some optimism that the filibuster will be changed sooner rather than never. But
we were just talking about this, and what I mentioned to Alex is that we did a briefing a few weeks ago with Adam Jennerson, a former Senate staffer who's like a big filibuster activist, and I was surprised because you look at Manchin saying like, dude, fuck it, I love the filibuster and it's never going away ever, and Sinema saying the same thing, and you kind of think, man, where are we going here? This is like, there seems to be no hope. But I was surprised that he was like, I'm going to play this out. None of us thought it was going to come over the, relief bill. We're going to have to kind of have bills come up, have it be demonstrated that the Republicans are basically going to veto, have a filibuster veto on everything, play this out into the year until and basically the people who really work this issue seem relatively optimistic that we're going to get some movement. And Alex, it seems like you're picking up similar.
I think so. And I think the way it's going to happen is that they're going to position it as saving the filibuster. And I'm not like keyed in enough to know if this is like, this is not from talking to anyone. This is just my impression. And there's a lot of reforms you could do that basically make it the case that 50 votes plus one can get things passed, that you could still include delay for debate or all these other ways to sort of ratchet that 60 vote requirement down to make it not a veto point. Because when Manchin talks about preserving the filibuster, he always, the justification is always like, we got to protect the minority's right to debate. Debating will make these bills better. The filibuster is always justified with debate. So there's like, the ideal outcome here is like, is Chuck Schumer saying, look, we saved the filibuster and we're passing HR 1 with 51 votes.
Right. Right.
So then it becomes a question of like, how attached are those two, and the other senators who are less vocal about it? How attached are they to the 60 vote requirement as opposed to not wanting to get bad headlines for killing the filibuster?
Well, it's interesting to me that I have thought for a long time that I can see a role for a different kind of filibuster. And so two thoughts on this. One is that maybe it's something like this. So one party can't just come in, vote something, and it's done, kind of really quickly. But there's some time limit. Like you can, the other parliaments have used to have some version of this with multiple readings of a bill.
Yeah.
It's somewhat similar that you just, slow it down a bit. Like, let's think it over. Like, and that's one thing, as long as there's some time limit, A. And then the other thing, and this is what gets complicated and with people's kind of Hollywood fantasies of what the filibuster was, that all the exertion has to be done by the majority.
Yeah.
All totally. The stuff. And so people you see this on, people who are not, kind of insiders saying this a lot, kind of, why don't they do it like the old days? We have to get up and talk. And the way that the current filibuster is structured is you don't have to do anything. You just have to kind of,
send an email, don't you? You're like...
send an email kind of saying we're going to stop it. And then so it slows everything down, but you don't have to do anything. And critically, you don't have to be on cameras.
Yeah.
So you kind of just stop everything. I mean, to me, something as simple as saying, okay, you can have the filibuster, but that means at any moment you got to mobilize 40 votes, come into the Senate, and be there to say no.
Yeah.
And
I've seen
even
exact-
that, yeah, and even that, even if it were absolute, even if there were no time limit, that would make it public, and it would be hard. Everybody, even that dude who's in Cancun, he's got to come, right? So it would make it visible. The kind of like, wow, they tried to get they just tried to get a minimum wage again, and the Republicans once again, they all got together and said no.
Right.
And even that would be, I think that would change the dynamics pretty significantly. But I'm interested that, again, I'm if it weren't for people who know more than I do being somewhat optimistic, and not people who I think are idiots, right? People who are pretty hard boiled and I really think they've got the right values and know what they're talking about. They seem kind of optimistic, which leaves me kind of optimistic, or more optimistic than I would be.
Here's one interesting data point, which is that a longtime defender of the filibuster in the Senate recently came out against it, and that's Bernie Sanders. He, up until I think just the other day, even if he always said he had a plan to get around it if elected president, he never said he would eliminate it. And he kind of just came out and said it the other day. And that's one senator moving on that issue.
And he wasn't any sort of reform, just like it's done, get rid of it.
I think it was just a tweet, but I think he just said it's time to eliminate it. I might have to double check, but I think he just said that.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Kate.
Oh, I was just going to add, obviously there's a lot of kind of tea leaf reading and like parsing every statement Sinema and Manchin make, to the point of its death, where it's like, well, this apostrophe might indicate some squishiness. But, one interesting thing on this is we had a reader send in to us kind of the form filibuster letter that Sinema's office has been, I assume, sending everybody who writes in about the filibuster. And it kind of is like a very simplified, kind of lacking some context about the filibuster's use by, segregationists, but a history of the filibuster. And, something that did stand out to me, even in this kind of like anodyne letter, was there is she devotes like a couple paragraphs to kind of the death of the talking filibuster, basically, which is what we're talking about, the forcing the people who are filibustering the bill to get on the floor and, hold the time. And that, again, tea leaf reading, we're all inclined to try to like really read into what these people are saying, but that could be somewhat of a data point in the direction of, it would allow both Manchin to be yelling at reporters, Jesus Christ, I'm never going to abolish the filibuster, with his other statements about my number one priority is ensuring that Biden has a successful presidency, in a way that those two things have been very hard to square up until this point.
Well, look, the issue of substance here is we need to bash Kyrsten Sinema, because she is so full of shit that it is beyond all. I mean, look, Joe Manchin is kind of an old guy. I think he's over 70. He's been around forever. He is absolutely the only Democrat who will ever be elected into the Senate from West Virginia in the history of time ever. And he's, for very substantive, if not good reasons, he's very pro fossil fuels, all these he comes to it. It's not surprising that he's kind of there for all these reasons. And Kyrsten Sinema, I mean, Jesus Christ, she was like the Green Party spokesperson, I think, for Nader in Arizona in 2000, until like 3 days ago. She was I don't know if she was left wing exactly, but she certainly wasn't this. And she comes from a trending purple state. She's got a colleague who's going to be up for election next year. Mm-hmm. And if the whole Democratic Party crashes and burns, he'll be toast. And this is just like 100% preening. I don't know what. It's so bizarre. At least, like I said, Manchin comes to it with some logic.
Yeah. I agree. I wrote, and as a sort of longtime critic of self-important Senate moderates, I wrote basically a defensive Manchin a while ago that made some of these very similar points, especially because his political history shows he will vocally separate himself from the party, often on things of no substance,
like Neera Tanden.
Exactly.
And Neera, like her personally, but this is not.
Neera Tanden wasn't gonna, was not gonna help the people of West Virginia.
Look, West Virginia is ride or die on the OMB. It's all they talk about there.
But but the thing one moment I described as sort of explaining who Manchin is as a politician, which I found it very funny, but it seems to work, is that he voted in the first impeachment, he voted to impeach Trump, and a month later was suggesting he was open to endorsing Trump's reelection. he was like, well, I'm not decided yet. Trump he still might win me over. And like, maybe that drives some Democrats nuts, but I'm like, that's a senator who's good at politics right there.
Yeah.
He voted to remove the guy from office, and then talking to the reporters back home in his state that goes, plus 40 Trump. He's like, president might win me over still.
Yeah, and as you say, talk is cheap. Who cares what he says to a reporter? And I think that's right. And again, as part of the Manchin Love Fest, because of that history, and because he's never torpedoed anything.
No, exactly.
Not when other people, maybe when there were 10 other Democrats, but he's never really torpedoed anything. And because of his history over the last, I don't know how long he's been, 15, 20 years or something like that, when he does something, it's generally like, I figure you need to do that to remain senator. So okay.
Mm-hmm.
With Sinema,
you're totally right.
My God.
Yeah, and it's like I sometimes just describe her as like just an agent of chaos. I truly think that she, like, it's hard to say what her political core is, and she does just sometimes seem to like being unpredictable for the sake of it. And I understand that maybe she's just trying to establish a McCain-esque maverick brand, but like you say, Arizona's a purple state that you don't need a Democrat who acts like that to keep a seat like that. I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. It just doesn't. It just doesn't add up. And she's not going to be like, she's. I don't even know who the left Senate Democrat is. She's not going to be Sanders. Get that.
Yeah.
But this is like, even I expect Manchin to be saying like, Sinema, what is your problem?
Yeah.
Like what's gotten into you? What it's just crazy. Anyway.
Well, and the other part of Sinema that is weird to me is how she is like somewhat press shy. She usually doesn't, like Manchin is kind of the more, like I'm in the Hill Pool. He's talking to reporters pretty much every time he walks through the hallways. Like, and there are just not nearly as many clips from Sinema. And she kind of likes to keep her, she's pretty terse when she does say things. She doesn't, with the exception of that dangerous creature t-shirt she wore on the Senate the other day, she doesn't seem to really like relish the glow of the spotlight in the same way that Manchin does. Like Manchin, people started calling him Senate Majority Leader and things like that. And, he says there's just color coming in about how he's kind of, says hi to everybody on and off the floor. Everyone's looking to make time with Manchin. And like, it does not seem to be the similar dynamic with Sinema. Which is another part of this that is interesting to me, which is, I can see someone who's super attention hungry kind of taking the position that she's taking because it just gets you, people want to talk to you and know what you're thinking, who you're going to vote for. But, she doesn't really seem to at least go looking for that as much as other senators do.
I spoke with someone who used to work for her and who was a fan of hers. And this person was saying, she's just not a people person. I don't know if she's kind of an introvert or whatever, but you can tell Manchin, it's that kind of glad hand, that kind of, that's
totally.
It's a certain kind of politician who just relishes that stuff, chatted it up with the press, kind of, backslapping and all that kind of stuff. And I think even though that's obviously going to present differently for someone who's 30 years younger, a woman, not a man, she's just not that person.
Yeah.
Right. Well, maybe that's a good place to leave it for today.
Well, Alex, thanks for coming by, man.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
This was really, it's funny that we have this kind of ongoing host debate, because sometimes when you have a guest, it's kind of like everybody's feeling like it should be an interview, and it's like everything is kind of like. But this is great. I feel like you're just like part of the crew. I've really enjoyed it. So I hope you'll come back. I mean, it's really
come back.
a lot of fun.
That was really fun. I'd be happy to come back.
All right. So let me remind everybody that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. If you're ready to give it a try, you can get 25% off your first order at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. All right.
All right.
Later,
Thanks,
folks.
Alex.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Alex.
Yeah.
Later.